Welcome to the Newtown Big Dreams podcast, an interview-style talk show that's your gateway to the fabulous and fascinating people who relocated to start a new life. Whether you're new to our podcast or your city, our fellow neighbors from across Canada, North America, and the entire English-speaking world share their stories of reaching new horizons and big dreams. So sit back and relax as we navigate in-depth and intimate conversations with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, executives, creatives, and anyone who can share their story about their Newtown big dreams. And now, here's your host, Luke J. Menkes.
Rob, thank you for coming in today, and thank you for the wine. I'm really excited to try this.
Yeah,
I love wine.
You were very welcome. Me too. I love wine as well.
Awesome. So we're going to talk all about that, and your winery, and your history with wine, and why you love it so much. But you grew up in Edmonton, and you've been in Kelowna for about 7 years. So just give us a little bit of background how you ended up in Kelowna.
Sure. So I spent most of my life in BC and most of it in Vancouver. But for whatever reason, and I can't, people ask me all the time, why do you love wine so much? And I can't give them a straight answer. I say I just was born that way, and it is what it is. But about 10 years ago, maybe 11, even more, just started getting more than a casual interest in wine, and I started studying to become a sommelier. So I took the WSET courses, the International Sommelier Guild courses. And even in those courses, that wasn't enough for me. What I truly wanted to do was make stuff. And so one day I woke up and said, no, I'm just going to have to figure out how to do that. And I talked to a whole bunch of people in the industry and came up with this idea that's not new to me, that's done all around the world. But it's what we call a virtual winery. So I had very little money, and I wanted to get my feet wet. So essentially what I did is rented space in another winery. I made wine under their license. I bought nothing but raw products, so just grapes and barrels. And I apprenticed with a winemaker there.
Right.
And that is how I got kind of the foray into it. And people always ask me, well, where does this name Nagging Doubt come from? But just getting into this wine industry, that's my nagging doubt, something that's been in the back of my mind for years. And it was nagging at me and always
Interesting.
Goading me on, and so finally I just woke up one day.
Now I know. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, because I always wondered.
Yeah, where the name comes from.
It's an interesting name. Yeah. So, do you think taking the courses, so you obviously you had a love for wine, decided to take the courses, did that kind of build your desire to actually make it? Because you're learning about, there's a lot of geography and history in the course, right? My partner, Kara, has taken level 2. Just finished level 2, and we watch documentaries, and before she prepares for the test, she's telling me what she's reading. I love geography and I love history. So did that kind of increase the desire? Like you were thinking, I could do this, I should be doing this?
It definitely increased the desire, so that's for sure. But I would say I found so I loved taking the courses. And one of the greatest things that came out of it was it just honed my palate. So it allowed me to understand how professionals adjudicate wine. Okay. What are the things that they are looking for? And what are the categories that they use to say this wine is average, good, great, outstanding? That's the most I got out of that was just that understanding. But I have to say it was also frustrating for me to take them, because my passion and my interest was actually doing it. That's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to make the stuff as opposed to study where it comes from. Right. So, but I say this to other winemakers who's never actually taken these courses, I would highly recommend at least 1 or 2 levels minimum, so that you understand how the people who are adjudicating your wine adjudicate your wine.
Interesting. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. What makes a good wine versus a mediocre wine? Or a terrible wine.
Yes,
and terrible should be obvious, right?
It should. It's terrible would be categorized as faulted, right? There's something wrong with it chemically, or But so the characteristics. The best way to answer it is the characteristics of a great wine are balance. So all of the components that make up the flavor profile. So the color, the acidity. In the case of red wine, the tannin. They are in perfect harmony or balance. One doesn't overpower the other. And when you have a wine that's structured that way and you taste it, it has a very long finish as a result. So it has enough fruit, tannin, acid to carry the flavor in your mouth long after you swallow or spit out the wine. It should stay in your palate for a good minute, and that's the classic characteristic of a good wine. Others will tell you that complexity is something very important to them. So that means when you smell and taste it, there are so many things going on. It's hard to say it's, strawberries or vanilla or, dried fruit or something like that. It's just very complicated. So many flavor profiles going on.
Right.
That's also usually a classic characteristic of an outstanding wine.
Right. And even within that, there's so many different tastes that people subjectively like better than the other.
It's true. Is
there a lot of disagreement about what is a good wine, or is the technical part of it universal?
Yeah. So the technical part is fairly universal, and sommeliers will tell you what they like about wines for sure. Mm-hmm. When you do a chemical profile, there is a certain profile that tends to be rated the highest. Even though sommeliers aren't doing chemical analyses on wine, I can tell you, as having studied at the university level, we absolutely do study this kind of thing. We look at, what's the total acidity or titratable acidity, it's called TA, what's the pH, what's the Brix at harvest, what's the final reducing sugar amount in the must, and so we look at all of the profile of it, and you can even do studies on the phenolic content. You can measure how much phenolic content is in a wine.
What's that? What is phenolic content?
So, great question. So phenolics are the components of a wine. It's a broad category, but it's all of the molecules that are in a wine that provide it with flavor, and it includes tannin, and there are many different types of tannin in wine. It includes something called anthocyanins. Those are the color components in the wine. And it includes all the molecules that, when you swirl your glass, they become volatile. And that's also phenolic compounds. They give you a smell, a certain smell. Right. Vanillin is one of the most prominent ones with heavy oak wine. So vanillin is the exact same molecule that's present in vanilla, and that's what smells like vanilla.
Interesting. Is it actual vanilla, or it's just chemically?
It's a chemical compound or a molecule that's found in oak, as well as in the vanilla pod that you purchase when you want to bake. Yeah,
interesting.
It's the same molecule, basically.
So they're not necessarily adding vanilla flavor.
Yeah. It is naturally present in certain species of oak.
That is interesting. Yeah. I learned something new.
There you go.
Is it possible to have a wine that tastes really great but doesn't look correct? Like it cloudy? It is. First of all, tell us what you're looking for when you say it's got great color or it's looking correct.
Yeah, and this is the fun part about wine. So let's start with color. When it is originally fermented, it's very bright purple. Almost a blue tinge, which is another certain molecule that eventually goes away. But the best thing about wine is things change over time. It's a biological product. It's not something that's chemically stable, right, in a bad way. It's chemically unstable in certain ways, right? It changes over time, and so what happens is, let's start with color. You get, when you first have it, look at it, it's kind of purple, and then over time it turns kind of a ruby red, and then over time it starts to change almost brown. And this is red wine I'm referring to here, so it becomes like a brick red color, almost a brownish tinge to it. And this is just what happens when a wine naturally ages. Those anthocyanins, oxygen gets introduced to them, and they start changing. And to me, that's what I love about it, right? Yeah. It's like you buy it and it's just evolving as you store it and try it later. And it's a different experience almost every time you open a bottle.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So can you tell if a wine is off just by looking at it before you smell it or taste it?
Well, so when you look at a wine, you're looking for something called clarity, right? So that doesn't mean you can kind of see right through it if you hold it up under a light or on a piece of white paper. Some wines are opaque, but what it means is you don't notice any fault. Fault is generally considered cloudiness or some other characteristic that shouldn't be there, and it's usually there's a number of reasons why a wine can become cloudy. But a visual fault is not necessarily associated with any other fault. So you can have a wine that, for example, is not filtered,
right?
And it can be it has a little bit of cloudiness to it, and that filtration just takes out particulate. and when that particulate is present, it actually tastes pretty good. It doesn't taste bad, but so the wine you're tasting now is actually not filtered.
I see.
Yeah.
Let me see it again.
I like the way you roll.
Do you drink wine every day?
Yeah, I tend to. You have to be cautious, right? So you're exposed to it all the time, and so I try to be reasonable. But if I don't drink wine, I generally am tasting it every week for sure. So I'm going and tasting my wine, seeing how they're doing in the winery, that kind of thing, and it's usually sip and spit. But
right,
yeah.
And what is the purpose of spitting? Is it so you don't get intoxicated?
Yeah, for sure. Don't get intoxicated. There's a lot of calories in wine too. Right. You can gain weight quite quickly if you're not careful.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Are some higher calories than others?
I couldn't tell you, but I think probably sugar level would be
and it's the conversion of the alcohol into sugar. I think that really causes the weight issue for people who drink too much.
Yeah, well, it's a carbohydrate for sure, and But so you just got to be careful there. But yeah, certainly when I'm professionally tasting wine, so in other words, I'm making wine and I want to assess its characteristics, or I'm doing some sort of trial with a fining or filtration agent, I do it blind and I sip and spit, because you literally some days when I'm making a red blend, for example, this red blend, it took me a full day to make that blend, and I just kept trying different combinations and permutations until I came up with the final one that I like the best. But I'm spitting all day, because after you tried that much, you'd be on the floor.
Right. So you said this one is not filtered, so it looks a little bit cloudy. Is that correct?
To me, it doesn't look cloudy, but so what I do. So here's the thing with wines: there are a number of different ways you can approach winemaking. What my philosophy is called, what I call minimal intervention. It's a kind of a common term. There are a bunch of things you can do with wine. You can add chemicals to it. You can, filter it. You can fine it. There's just a number of things you can do to manipulate a wine to get it closer to that perfect state that you want. Yeah. What I tend to do is just add yeast, sulfur, and that's it. Yeah. And some of my wines, they do require filtration. They just look a little too cloudy. But with red, what's called racking, if you fill up the barrel after pressing off the grapes, and then you take the top layer of the wine and all the sediment, leave it in the barrel at the bottom, and you just put it into a clean barrel. And you keep doing that several times, and what you'll end up doing is having a wine that's still quite clear. And this wine is in that category. So,
and would putting it through filtration, would that change the flavor?
Well, that's a $1 million question, and there's a lot of debate over that. There are a lot of people who think it does fundamentally change the flavor of the wine. Admittedly, some of the studies that I've read, most professionals could not tell the difference in a flavor or smell between a filtered and an unfiltered wine. But there's a lot of factors that go into it. It depends on how granular you filter the wine. You can use a very coarse filter that just takes out big particulate, and you can use a very fine 0.4 micrometers, or I believe it's micrometers anyway, that take out bacteria and yeast. The filter is so small that it takes bacteria out of the wine. Yeah. So
has your winemaking evolved? I'm sure it has, but it's evolved over time. Is the wine you make today different than what you did when you first started?
Yes.
And why?
This will be my 10th year making wine, and I'm still learning. And I think in another 10 years, I will say to you, I'm still learning how to make wine. Yeah. There's so much that you can do. There's so much that goes into making a wine that it really is a constantly evolving art. And it really does take years of experience to make a quality wine. And I still have batches that I experiment with every year, and I go, wow, that just tastes terrible.
And sometimes you surprise yourself, I'm sure.
Yeah,
you're like,
absolutely. And then one of the things I do is I kind of try to practice a mix of century-old winemaking and modern winemaking.
What is the big difference between the two?
Yeah, well, years ago they didn't understand the science.
Right.
They microbiology was a thing of the future several hundred years ago, and so they would squeeze a bunch of juice, throw it in the corner of a house or a cellar, and let it naturally ferment. Right. The yeast that's in the air would get in there and just naturally ferment the wine. And there's something wonderful and organic and interesting about that. And I have what I have done in the past is done wines where I've done exactly that. I've just squeezed the juice out of the grapes, put it in a vat, and done nothing to it. Maybe a little bit of sulfur, but that's it, so it doesn't oxidize. But in general, I love natural fermentations where just yeast that's naturally in the air, that's naturally in the grapes themselves, ferments the wine. And then I combine that with what they do today in modern wineries, which is they purchase commercial yeast that's available. They can pick a specific strain of yeast they like because they like the way it ferments the wine. They sulfur the wine, they cold settle it and get all the particulate out. They filter it. I do that as well.
Yeah. Do you still have any bottles left from 10 years ago?
Yeah, so I keep an archive of every wine we've ever made. And starting back in 2010, that was our very first vintage.
Yeah. And do you still drink that occasionally?
I do. Yeah, not very often. I don't have that many cases, but every now and then I'll have a special friend over, or it'll be a special occasion. We'll pull out a bottle from our very first vintage or second or third vintage.
And it's still fine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet.
So, I mean, I'm sure it's very different, but with the podcast, if I listen to a very early episode, I almost can't listen to it because I just kind of cringe. And I'm like, the quality is so bad and the questions aren't flowing and it's very stilted. But it was good from day one, your winemaking.
Well, but I started by apprenticing with a winemaker. So I had someone hold my hand and help me make those wines from day one.
Nice. Yeah. How did you get into that situation? I think mentorship and apprenticeship is a great thing. And I always encourage my children, follow someone that you really admire and respect.
Yeah.
And learn from them. But how did you get into a situation where someone was teaching you?
Yeah, and then I'd love to tell you it's a great romantic story, but I literally just looked online, Googled, and I just started calling people and eventually landed on this gentleman named Mark Simpson, who still makes wine today. He's works at the BC Wine Studio and has his own label as well, and he does custom crush. So he's a winemaker for a number of different labels in BC. Nice. Yeah, and that's how I learned. I remember he happened to have a little place in Vancouver, and I was living in Vancouver, and I went over there for a half day, and we just got along, and we decided to embark on this journey.
That's great.
Yeah,
and I guess that was good because if he's making custom crush, as you called it, you're getting to see a variety of different techniques and styles and
exactly
and so on.
Yeah, you got it.
So tell us a little bit about your style. What makes it unique? I know there are hundreds of labels and many dozens of even grapes.
Yeah.
So tell us what makes Nagging a little bit different from others.
Sure. The first thing I'll start with is one of the things I wanted to do is not make a huge volume of wine. In other words, 15 different varietals. What I wanted to concentrate on is 3 or 4 styles, and that's it. So when we do tastings, I only pull out usually 4 bottles tops when I go to a restaurant and say, you want to try our wine? And it's always 2 whites, 2 reds. The reason is I think it's such a complex art that I just wanted to focus on 4 things and 4 things only and do them well. And then, I'm very proud of BC and all these incredible winemakers who can make 15. I'm not in that category.
Right.
My brain is too small, I think. And what makes us different is our size, to be honest with you. We are very small, very boutique. I make every wine by hand, start to finish. That allows me to experiment in ways that larger, more commercial wineries can't, because there's a little more financial, there's a little more money at stake in those situations where I can do these tiny little batches and I can experiment, with 10 cases and say, okay, let's try this yeast strain versus another, or let's not even use a yeast strain. Let's just put it outside in the vineyard and see how it develops and ferments on its own just outside in the vineyard.
Right.
I've also done foot stomping. Remember, I was talking about using age-old. Yeah, so I 2 seasons in a row, I made Pinot Noir by foot stomping some of the grapes.
Is there a big difference in taste?
Yes.
Foot stomping versus machine.
Yeah, for sure.
What is
and foot stomping is the claim is it's a gentler, more gentle way to get the juice out of the grapes. My personal opinion is it can get, because when you do that, you keep the stems are still on the grapes. You actually can get quite aggressive tannin. in your must. So I'm sitting there and I'm pounding out with my feet, but I'm also breaking the stems a little bit. And there are chemical compounds in those stems that come out in the must, and a lot of tannin in those stems. So you can get some pretty grippy wines that way.
Yeah.
But it was a fantastic experiment to try. I really enjoyed it. Probably would never do it again because the results weren't so great that it was worth the effort. But
it's a lot of hard work.
It is. And the grapes come in October for reds. And, I'm sorry, but that must is like at, 5 degrees Celsius, which imagine putting some water in a fridge and then stepping in it. Yeah, it's not so much fun.
So you don't do that anymore?
I do not. I might do it in the future. We've got, on our estate vineyard, we've got about an acre of Pinot Noir, and I might try one more time, maybe just a small batch to see what the foot stomping does on that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so is that the case today? You've got 2 reds and 2 whites?
Yeah. So, and it's a little bit more complicated than that, but pretty much stayed tried and true to that. We have experimented with different whites and different reds, but in general, when we put out wines, we put out, 2 whites, 2 reds almost every time. It's just they sometimes vary which ones they are. But so, our journey was fun. It took a long time. It was an incredible amount of work. And when people show up in our winery, I say, what you're looking at and standing in was a 10-year journey. But one of the most rewarding parts of it that I wanted to talk about was being a virtual winery is great. I enjoyed it, and I needed to do it because I could not afford to get into the business any other way. It was just not a fiscal reality for us.
Right.
And so to get some revenue coming in, to be able to have a recognized label a little bit, that really helped enable me to move to the next level. But the most important thing for me was to own my own land with my own grapes and farm that property. So that I can control the quality of the product from start to finish in the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And
so just reiterate for us, what is a virtual winery?
Yeah, no problem. So, and there's a whole bunch of terms for it. Custom crush is a more common term. Négociant is the French term for basically the same thing. But it's basically, you don't own the equipment. You don't even necessarily have a license. You use another winery and their equipment, and you pay them a set fee every month or by case or by year, whatever they agree to make the wine in that facility and under their license.
And you get the grapes from wherever?
And I just source the grapes from growers. Yeah. Okay. So I have contracts in place with growers who are able to have some excess and say, I can give you a couple tons of this or a ton of that every year.
Cool. Yeah. So the business aspect of it, were you able to accumulate enough savings doing that in order to acquire the land? Or did you have investors? Or tell us.
Yeah, good question. And my second, I have an entrepreneurial spirit, and I love being my own boss, and that was also a key driver for me to get into the business and just have my own business. I like doing that. But we have no investors. It was purposeful. I've had a lot of people ask and show interest, and I greatly appreciate that. But I love being my own boss and being responsible only to me and my family. And so it took us a long time to be able to afford a property, and we had to sell off our assets in Vancouver and all that kind of stuff to be able to afford it, and also had to borrow from the bank quite a bit to be able to make it happen. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I love stories like that. And you used to be a drummer. Were you professional, or was it more of a hobby?
Oh, let's a professional's a loose term in the music world, I think maybe.
So I play in a club for a bar tab.
Yeah, so I used to. Music was kind of my first love, and I still do love it. I listen to it.
Do you have a drum kit?
Every day. I still have my drum kit. And my first year of university, I was a music major, a percussion student. And but I joined many bands starting in high school and university, and one of them just happened to take off a little bit more than the others, and we put out a CD, and we were on Much Music and did tours of Canada.
Wow. What was the name of your band?
The Loved One.
The Loved One.
Literally loved by one, I think.
And that was out of Vancouver?
Edmonton.
Edmonton, okay.
Yeah. We're going way back here, Luke. This is 90s.
Well, I know Edmonton's always had a pretty good live music scene down on White Ave there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I lived in Edmonton for a couple of years, and it was always great. $5, $10, you could catch a show, and so damn cold.
You might have seen us. You didn't know.
It's possible. Great. And then you were a corporate manager for a while. Did you hate that?
No. In fact, I still enjoy it.
Really?
Yeah. So, I had a career in HR and very much enjoyed every company I've ever worked for. I've had good things to say about it and career, but just, wine has always been my true passion and love and what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, HR is interesting because I'm sure it helps you with the hiring process. Like you do have some staff, right? Yeah,
for sure. Well, I have to say it's one of the biggest advantages I think I had is I've had a solid business background and just through experience and definitely human resources. And I know a lot of folks I've talked to over the years, they've certainly have, they don't know how to write an employment contract. They don't know what should go in it. They don't know how to properly manage payroll and that kind of thing. Yeah. It's all a learning curve for them. Whereas I hit the ground running. I had my employment contracts all worked out. I had my timesheets in the office. I had the payroll ready to go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how skills that, people on the outside might not necessarily see as applicable to the wine business, but very applicable.
Yeah.
Right? You got to make payroll, and you got to cover the bills, and you got to hire the right people.
You do. And with the business of my size, it's really a team of one. I basically have to take on all these tasks. But admittedly, in larger organizations, they hire professionals. They have an HR department and middle management and all that kind of stuff to manage the business.
Do you have any staff?
I do. I hire every year. Rotating, but I've got contractors who generally do the initial work in the vineyard with me. So just the winter pruning, tying the vines down, that kind of thing. And then during the summer, I usually take on one or two casual labor students who help me do things like shoot and leaf thinning. Yep. And then all hands on deck when we're picking. I get everyone willing to go out with the vineyard, including family and friends.
Nice. That's awesome.
I pay them in wine, those guys.
Yeah. Great. Is your tasting room open 12 months of the year?
It is not. It's mostly in summer, so spring. Basically mid-April to October. But I say this every time. If it's the dead of winter and you're local and you want to make your way up our driveway, I'm happy to open the doors.
Very nice.
Yeah.
What do you do in the winter?
Winters that's the winemaking holiday. So basically, once that last drop goes in the barrel, there's not that much to do for the next 2 or 3 months in the winery, and there's certainly nothing to do in the vineyard. It's all the vines are dormant. So that's that November to February period is that nice.
So you get to taste the wine, sit by the fire, read books.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the vacation time.
Very cool. So you've got some new estate wines coming up.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that, really the dream for me was to be able to have my own vineyard and control my own fruit. And we planted by hand, it took 2 years, but we did a year in 2014 where we planted about 3 acres and then another 2.5 acres in 2015. So the 2018 vintage is really the first year where we've had a full usable crop to make wine out of. And so that's what we're excited about is this week we're going to be bottling a white blend and 2 other whites, a Chardonnay and a Sigaribe. And that'll be really our first foray into selling estate wine. So we're very excited about that.
So what is an estate wine?
Good. That's actually a great question. Estate wine means it's the wine grown on the property that's co-located where the winery is. So it's basically owned and operated by us. Doesn't necessarily have to be on right next to the winery, but it's basically a plot of land that is owned and operated by our winery.
Okay, so prior to that, what were you doing?
So we had grower contracts and leases. So some of our grapes came from leases where I would lease the whole vineyard from an owner and pay that owner a set fee, and then that owner would let me go and farm the property and do whatever I want with the grapes. Nice. And I basically took all of them with me. Versus, like, say, a grower contract, I have a lot of those where I just purchase grapes on a per ton basis.
Right.
So
you
less
get them
control.
In crates and then.
Exactly. And less control over how they're grown.
Yeah.
But still necessary in the wine business to supplement. So our estate vineyard is located in that's Kelowna, southeast Kelowna. But it's northerly up here. I mean, this isn't very super hot weather.
Right.
In the grape world, I'm limited in terms of what I can grow on that property. So we want to make a bigger red like you're drinking now called the Leap, which is a blend of Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Malbec. I have to go to vineyards in the south to source that grape.
I see. Beautiful label. Who designs your labels?
Yeah, sure. So her name is Dana Tanamachi. She's originally from Texas, I believe, but spent most of her life in Brooklyn, New York, and now lives in Seattle. And when we were coming up with the concept of how to name the wine and what the label should look like, I described my philosophy to the man who helped me design this. And I said I wanted to make wine by hands, start to finish, and I'm kind of passionate about that. And, the concept was, well, we need a label that reflects that. It has to be drawn by hand. And so he found this artist in Brooklyn at the time and said, look, we're creating this wine label and we want you to draw it by hand on a chalkboard, and we're going to film it as well. And so if you go to our website, you can actually see here, draw these labels by hand.
Beautiful. Yeah. Wonderful. So maybe take me through a tasting. I've had 2.5 small glasses so far, and it's beautiful. Maybe if I was like at your winery and doing a tasting, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, again, so what you're tasting is called the Leap, and this is our newest red blend. We have 2 red blends. One's called the Pull, and this one's called the Leap. The Leap is meant to be a simpler version of the Pull. It contains 3 varietals, so it's mostly Merlot, but it has Cabernet Franc and Malbec. The grapes come from 2 sources. The Malbec and Cab Franc come from the same vineyard in Osoyoos, and the Merlot comes from a vineyard in Naramata. That's the one I lease. I love this wine. It's just kind of a simple sipper. That's the way I view it. And when you smell it, you get a lot of fruitiness. So it's got that beautiful, just grape juiciness that I love, right? And I can go into all these complex descriptors, but when I smell it, I just get a nice bowl of red and black fruit, like just nice big whiff of that. And underline that, it's about 40%, it's aged in about 40% new oak, so you do definitely get some baking spice, some spicy notes that come from the oak. And I've aged this, as most of my red wines, I age only for 18 months, but I decided for this, I would age for 24 months in barrel to give it a little bit more complexity, a little bit more interest, and it kind of changes the color profile a little bit, less purple now, more ruby, turning to brick red. And yeah, that's how I would describe that wine.
That's beautiful. What is the longest you would ever age a wine in a barrel?
Every wine is different. The varietals that are notorious for being able to age in long periods, or for long periods, are Cabernet Sauvignon, Nebbiolo from Italy. That's the grape that goes into Barolo. There's a few others, but they have intense tannins. They have very thick skins, so they tend to impart a lot of phenolic flavor and components into the must, and as a result, they can age for long periods of time, especially with higher tannins. So those classically can be aged for a lot longer. I don't work typically with those varietals. I sometimes with Cabernet Sauvignon, but mostly I work with the varietals that I think they start to hit their point when they're ready to be bottled in the 18-month range.
Just as a point of trivia, do you know what is like the longest anyone has tried to age? And is there a certain point where it just gets ridiculous? It turns and it's no good anymore.
Yeah, well, it does. So the longer you age a wine, the longer you're exposing it to small amounts of oxygen in the barrel. So it's in a barrel, even if you're topping it up right to the top. There's going to be amounts that seep through the pores of the wood or embedded within the wood, and they get into the wine, and that's what ages a wine. That oxygen, right? Slowly over time, it can oxidize. So you introduce too much oxygen over time, and it will turn sour. Basically.
I see.
Yeah.
So turn sour. So you're adding complexity with time, but too much time, and it's too late.
Yeah, there is definitely such a thing as aging a wine too long. There are regions in the world that are known for produce wines that are known to be age-worthy, very age-worthy. So Bordeaux being a very classic example of those wines are meant to age for decades.
Wow.
Same
so they will sit in a barrel for decades.
They usually do like 2 to 3 year aging program, then bottle.
Okay.
But generally when people bottle it, they say, no, lay it down for another 5 years, and that's when it'll start to really develop a complexity that you want.
Interesting.
And same with Italy. So I mentioned Barolo. That's a region that is notorious for being able to take that Nebbiolo grape and age it for long, long periods of time. Spain, they have a whole system set up where, the term reserve actually means something by law about how long you have to age a wine. And so some of their Grand Reserves are aged for, 3 years before they hit bottle. Yeah. But, for me and my taste buds, I love that 18 to 24 month range that, the wine is still got some freshness to it, but also has a bit of complexity to it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of my sweet spot, that range where I love to bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All these aspects, growing, picking, processing, aging, branding, marketing. What is your favorite aspect, or do you love it all equally?
I don't love it all equally. Probably my least favorite aspect of it is the paperwork associated with running a winery. And I can tell you the alcohol is highly regulated. So there's a lot of paperwork every month. My favorite part is being in the vineyard.
Really?
Out of all of it. Yeah. And a lot of people ask me this, wouldn't you rather be in the winery? And I was like, no, to be honest with you, I love being outside, working the vineyard. It's very peaceful. And there's something very intrinsically rewarding about going out there, adjusting the vines, getting them the way you want, and watching them produce this fruit that turns into something that people love and enjoy.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And this time of year must be exciting for you because the weather's getting warmer.
Yes.
You can start to work.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Rob, and I've enjoyed the wine very much.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for bringing that.
You bet.
Who would you like to nominate to come on the show?
So I want to introduce you to Harv and Marina Johal. They are a couple living in the Glenmore area, a little off, and they own a cidery called Scenic Road Cider, or Cidery.
Great. Okay. Tell me just a little bit about them.
So well, they have a similar story as I do, in that they had day jobs. She was a pharmacist, and he still works in software. Uh-huh. But they had this gorgeous property with, old orchard, apple orchard, and an old packing house on their property. And they said, this is silly. We've got this gorgeous land that's producing beautiful apples, and we could, make this wonderful cider. And so they just one day said, well, let's do it. And Cedar Grove Cidery was born. Yeah.
Sounds like a great story.
It is a good story.
Thanks again, Rob.
Really cheers, Luke. You bet.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Newtown Big Dreams podcast with your host, Luke Menkes, and his authentic guests. And we love our listeners and hope you subscribe now to learn more about the amazing journeys of our incredible guests who relocated to find a new town, big dreams. And remember, make your dreams big.